long time ago, I'm talking like 8 years ago, two friends and I, James and Sean, did something really stupid. But at the time, doing stupid things was what we did to pass the time. We're not really friends with James anymore, but Sean and I still talk often, and so oftentimes we'll talk with each other about this story. We were 19 years old. We lived in bumfuck New Jersey. Lots of vacant houses in our old town. And atop a hilly road not far from our houses was an abandoned church. Locals knew about the church. It was on a closed-off road, and it had been abandoned for many years. I'm not sure if it's still standing or what the current state of it is, as I live in Florida now. But James, Sean, and I, being the troublemaking thrill-seekers we were, came up with this genius plan of bringing a Ouija board to the church late one night. This was October, so I guess we were doing it in honor of spooky season. Sean had the Ouija board in his closet, so he brought it. I drove the three of us, so I first picked up James, then Sean, and we just drove straight towards the church. Since the road up the hill to the church was literally blocked off, we had to park on the side of the road and walk from there. We followed the road up the hill to the church, using one flashlight at first, so as not to overdo it and draw any possible attention. But once we were atop the hill, we pretty much all three of us turned on our flashlights. The church was surrounded by woods in basically all directions, and had a gravel parking lot alongside it. The church had been broken into a million times before, and was littered with graffiti, so the big front door was already ajar. Two of us had to work together to pull it open because it scraped on the floor though. Once inside, we naturally just looked around the place with our flashlights to make sure no one else was in there. It was definitely creepy being in that place at night. Sean set up the Ouija board. Then he pulled out these 3 candles from his backpack as well, and he laughed and said it would add to the experience. He placed the 3 candles in a triangle formation around the board, and as they were all lit, we turned off our flashlights. Now the only light in the whole place was from the candles, creating a much more eerie and uncomfortable vibe. We really couldn't see more than maybe 6 feet in all directions. So we began playing with the Ouija board. Sean was doing most of the talking. At this point, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he definitely opened with "Is anybody there?" and the typical cliche Ouija board questions. The planchette started to move and we started to laugh. I knew it was one of them doing it. I feel like it's not possible to play with a Ouija board with your friends without someone jokingly moving around the planchette. We went along with it though, and whoever was moving it spelled out a few words. As this was going on though, we heard a weird crack type sound come from the altar of the church. Best way I could describe it is it sounded like a big piece of wood cracking in half. It was loud and it sounded like it was done by someone. We all jumped in reaction and hurried to shine our phone's flashlights in the direction of the altar. There was no one there as far as we could see. I think both of them were just as freaked out as I was after that. But the place was old and falling apart, so some weird noises here and there didn't seem that crazy, and so we kept going. We all took turns asking the board questions, but the planchette was no longer moving. I think because that crack sound freaked all 3 of us out, and now we were taking it more seriously. This went on for some time, until another sound from the altar area broke the silence again. But before we even had time to shine our lights over there again, something landed on the Ouija board, causing all of us to jump and scream. It was a rock about the size of a golf ball. All 3 of us just had our hands on the planchette 2 seconds ago, and there was no way any of us could have done that. We all 3 got up and ran back out of the church screaming, leaving the Ouija board and candles behind. We ran all the way down the hill and back to my car, and fearing we were being chased, we didn't stick around. I drove us all back to James's house, where we just sat in the car for a good half hour talking, wondering what exactly just happened. Sean is very religious and superstitious as well. He was confident we had reached a spirit of some kind. I don't really believe in any of that stuff. I believe there was someone else in the church with us, which I find to be equally terrifying. Sean went back to the church the next day with James to get his Ouija board back. And to make things even stranger, the Ouija board was missing, but the candles were still in place. When they saw it was missing from the entrance, they decided to just leave right away. This remains to be the single scariest experience of my life. When I was in high school, I had a couple of close friends, Jason and Brian. We did quite a bit together, and when it came time to graduate, Jason had to move away to Lexington, South Carolina with his family due to his father's work. After we graduated and he had completed his move with his family, my friend Brian and I were invited to pay a visit for a weekend to his new house. We decided out of boredom to start hiking around in the nearby forest and countryside, which we found had a scenic river. It was a beautiful area and felt quite peaceful, but we ended up getting lost. We decided to keep following the river as we lost track of which direction was upstream or downstream, with no sounds of civilization anywhere we could hear. We quickly became concerned about finding a telephone to call Jason's mom or dad to get us from wherever we were, even though there was no paved road or street that we could find nearby. As we kept following the river, we came to this old church-looking building made of really old red bricks with a dirt parking lot and a dirt road leading up to it. It was very encroached with growth and bushes. We decided to go inside and see if there were people, and maybe ask to use their telephone and get the address for this location. We noticed there were a few old cars which looked to be 70s or 80s, possibly Novas, 4 of them. Very dirty and rusted in this dirt parking lot with flat or missing tires. They were all white colored, or used to be, and parked in a row side by side. As we got closer, we heard gospel music sounds and some singing inside the church. We were relieved that there were people. So we went into the church, which appeared to be rather old and dilapidated. We peeked past the main doors to the hall and saw what I estimated was a couple dozen people dressed as nicely as they could, though they clearly were poor. When we went inside, the old white-haired woman wearing horn-rimmed glasses who was playing the church piano stopped playing, and she looked at us with no expression on her face. What happened next really stuck with me, and I will never forget it as long as I live. Everyone in that church stopped singing and put down their song sheets, and they all slowly turned their heads and looked at us with the most vacant and unwelcoming glares. Jason said, "We're sorry to interrupt. We just want to use your phone to call my folks to come get us." Nobody spoke. It was dead silent in that church other than the wooden pews creaking from the weight of the people in them. So we just slowly backed out of the door and let it close behind us, and looked at each other in ominous fear and quietly left. We started walking up that dirt road, and when Brian mentioned that there were no crosses or anything Christian in there, we looked back up the road to see that maybe a dozen of those people, all men, had walked out in the front of the church and were standing there watching us intently as we walked along the road. This freaked us out, and we began to sprint up that dirt road for what felt like a good half hour. We finally came to a very old, broken-down gas station that looked like one of those old full-service stations. We went inside to find that the shelves were mostly empty and dusty from a quick glance, and an old, overly tanned, swarthy man with a really oily and dirty baseball cap was behind the counter reading some old book with ragged edges and yellowed pages. He looked up and said, "You boys lost, huh? Just head out that way you came in and make a left, and follow that road till you see a telephone pole, and just go right at the pole down the trail and it'll take you to a highway." We thanked the man and left quickly, and as we walked down the road to the telephone pole the man told us about, again looked back, and the old man was out in front of the gas station with his arms folded, just staring at us with a rotten-toothed grin on his face. We got to the pole, made the right, and followed that trail to the nearest highway, after about a good half hour of walking in the twilight. It had just gotten dark as we got to the highway, and we tried to wave down a few people passing by, but nobody stopped. Thankfully, a police officer saw us and pulled over to help us. We told him we were lost and gave him Jason's address, to which he whistled and said we really were lost. It took about 30 minutes for that officer to drive us back to Jason's, and during the chit-chat, he told us we needed to be careful out in those woods, as there are some crazy witch folks in it.